All right, let's dive right in. You know, it's not every day that one of the minds behind the world's largest encyclopedia, a project built entirely on neutral, verifiable facts, announces he's embraced Christianity. We're talking about Larry Sanger, the co-founder of Wikipedia, and today we're going to unpack his really surprising intellectual journey. This isn't a story about some sudden change of heart, but a slow, really methodical change of mind.
So this really brings us to the central question, doesn't it? What on earth leads a lifelong, methodical skeptic, a guy who literally built his career on logic and verifiable facts, to embrace faith? It's kind of an intellectual mystery, right? So let's break it down, step by step.
Now, for Larry Sanger, it all started with his own core principle, methodical skepticism. And what's so fascinating is that the catalyst for this whole journey wasn't some personal crisis or big emotional event. Nope. It was the very philosophical tool he used to make sense of the world. He just decided to turn that skepticism inward. Instead of just questioning what other people believed, he started questioning his own lack of belief.
Okay, so let's get into the first part of his journey, which we're calling the doubter's dilemma. It's all about his foundation of skepticism. And it's a dilemma because, well, it was his very commitment to doubting everything that ended up leading him down a path he never, ever expected.
So what exactly is methodical skepticism? Well, it's basically the idea that you don't just accept a belief because it sounds good or feels right. You have to be able to justify it, to back it up with a really high degree of certainty. And for a guy like Sanger, this wasn't just some dusty old academic exercise. It was like the operating system for his entire worldview. It's how he processed everything.
And you can really see that operating system at work here. First, he decided, okay, I need to justify all my beliefs. So he turned that critical eye on atheism itself and then on agnosticism, the idea of just not knowing. And he had to be honest with himself. He realized, wait a minute, if I demand certainty from people who believe in God, I have to demand that same certainty for my non-belief. And he found he just couldn't justify atheism with absolute certainty. That led him to this huge admission. He recognized he had a massive gap in his knowledge. He had all these opinions about theology, but he'd never really studied it. And that little moment of intellectual humility, well, that opened the door for everything that came next.
All right, next up, moral and cultural concerns. Because, Sanger's internal philosophical questions, they weren't happening in some kind of bubble. He was also looking at the world around him. And what he saw, these pretty troubling trends, played a huge role in his shifting perspective.
So he starts to perceive what he sees as this really clear moral decline in Western culture. He was deeply disturbed by what he called genuine evil in elite circles, thinking about things like the Jeffrey Epstein case. And for him, this wasn't just, a political problem or a social issue. It felt like something spiritual. It made him step back and ask, hey, what happened to the moral and ethical foundation that, historically, Christianity provided for our society?
So, this brings us to the next phase, putting faith to the test. At this point, his whole philosophical groundwork is shaken, his cultural concerns are growing, so what does he do? He moves from just thinking about it to actively investigating. He decided he was going to put Christianity to the test, using the exact same intellectual rigor he'd use for any other serious subject.
And this chart right here just perfectly illustrates the complete 180 in his thinking. Look at this. Before he really studied it, his view of the Bible was pretty much the standard skeptical take, right? Incoherent, mythological, not really intellectually serious. But then he actually studied it, and what he found just blew him away. He found it was compelling, coherent, and actually, philosophically robust. A total reversal.
And look, this wasn't just some casual reading on a Sunday afternoon. He treated this like a serious research project. He was using modern tools like the YouVersion Bible app to read it systematically. He dove deep into classic philosophical arguments for God's existence, like the first cause argument, the one that asks, if everything has a cause, what was the very first cause that got the whole universe started? He was also reading works by Christian apologists like Stephen Meyer. He was really building an intellectual case, piece by piece.
Which leads us to the personal transformation itself, this quiet, gradual shift. And this is so important to get. This was not a lightning bolt moment. There was no single dramatic event. It was more like the turning of a tide, a quiet, gradual, internal shift that happened over months and even years of study and reflection.
And Sanger's own words really say it all. My conversion was quiet and uncomfortable. Think about that word, uncomfortable. This wasn't about finding some easy, feel-good answer. It was about genuinely wrestling with really difficult ideas and arriving at a conclusion that, frankly, challenged the entire foundation of his identity.
In fact, at the beginning, he called his faith provisional. It was almost like a working hypothesis. It started as an intellectual conclusion, a rational acceptance of a set of ideas. It wasn't driven by this big emotional breakdown over sin or some desperate need for salvation. It was simply the logical outcome of his honest, skeptical investigation.
But over time, starting from that intellectual foothold, his understanding started to get deeper. Through more study and just humble reflection. These concepts that probably once seemed really foreign or abstract, things like sin and forgiveness, they started to make personal, practical sense. That rational belief slowly began to evolve into a much more personal Christian faith.
So let's just tie this all together. This summary really lays out the whole path. You can see how it all connects. It started with his core principle, methodical skepticism. That led to intellectual humility, admitting what he didn't know. Then you add in his moral and cultural concerns about the world, and that's when he discovered the Bible's surprising coherence for himself. All of it culminates in that quiet, inner transformation. It's a journey really driven as much by pure reason as it was by anything else.
And that really leaves us with a final big question to think about. The man who helped create a project to organize all of human knowledge, he ultimately found what he believes to be the truth through a deeply personal, methodical, and even quiet investigation. It just makes you wonder, doesn't it? In our age of infinite information, where everything is just a click away, what does a genuine, personal search for truth even look like anymore?